Welcome to another round of the book reviews. I am Kyron, and today I have the book for you, Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse. I have recently finished reading this, as well as another book by him, Demian, so I'm going to be doing a sort of back-to-back book reviews of this by the same author. And why I didn't particularly like this one, but I really like Demian, so I'll just jump right into it. This was published in 1927. It was the 10th novel of the author Hermann Hesse, and it was written during a real period of turbulence for him. The First World War had finished off about 10 years prior, or 8 years prior, and he was going through a rough time in the sense that parts of his life were falling apart. He'd gotten married, but he sort of hadn't divorced from his wife yet, but was in a very estranged relationship. His kids were having problems. He was having personally depression, and I guess the whole world was in a bit of a tumultuous time, and there was a depression going on around that same time as well. So this book was written with basically all of that in mind, and while it's fiction, it does have parts that are autobiographical of his own experiences being in Germany in this time, or being in Switzerland. I can't remember exactly where it was, and his interactions. Like, you can see part of him in the way that he deals or thinks about his wife, and the way that he is suffering from suicidal thoughts and depression and whatnot. So, and as well, he was introduced to jazz in this time, American jazz, and that plays a fairly large part in the book as well. So an interesting fiction where it is partly autobiographical, but also very obviously fiction. So I'm just going to talk about the structure a little bit, because it is quite different from, I suppose, a standard fiction book, which is like a narrative tale which just goes follows. He experiments with some different things in this book, and it starts off with narration by an unknown character who is his flatmate, and then sort of switches over to narration of a book that the original narrator found of this guy called Harry Haller. And Harry Haller is the human name of the guy who basically, he calls himself the Steppenwolf, because he believes that inside of him he has a wolf that is battling with a wolf of the steppes that is battling with the human parts of him. So there's these conflicting emotions within him, and basically the structure of the book is like this unknown narrator finds this book, which is then narrated by the Steppenwolf, but also has within it like a little treatise on a common theme in the book, which is For Madmen Only. And that is another like mini book. So it's sort of like 3 books within a book sort of thing. So it's a very strange structure. And especially when you get towards the end, it starts to become very, I'm not sure exactly how to describe it, enigmatic, very extravagant, in the sense that the first part of it is more of his like daily life struggles, as in his thoughts of depression, his inability to connect with other human beings. He ends up meeting a girl called Hermione, which he sort of entrusts his life to, in a sense, and she teaches him how to be more social, how to enjoy these things, even though he sort of doesn't enjoy it at the same time. And then at the end, he enters this magical theater with a jazz player, Pablo, and Hermione, and there it just becomes very bizarre and very strange. So that's just sort of like the plot of the book, I guess, and a little bit of the structure. Some of the themes that are in the book: there's a plurality of inner voices and desires. Who am I is basically one of the questions in the book. Who am I? Am I the Steppenwolf? Am I Henry Haller? And what he ends up sort of seeing is that he'd been thinking of himself in a duality in some sense, but there's actually a multitude of different inner voices, and these change depending on who you're with, what the circumstances are. And I guess one of the things that he learns is like it's not that correct to think of I'm either the Steppenwolf or I'm Henry Haller, where it's actually like I'm a multitude of things. And I think that's what he sort of experiences a bit in the Magic Theatre, where he goes through all these bizarre experiences where he's a soldier fighting against like an insurrection in his own country. and then he's Mozart, and then he's Goethe, and then like there's all these different little things going on at the same time, and he gets to experience like a little story here, a snippet here of his own personality. At least I think that's what that part is about. It's definitely one of those ones where it's like open to your own interpretation. One of the things is like he felt outside of all and couldn't exist in a rigid system. And I think that was one part of the book which for me felt like a little bit, it didn't ring true. It was, maybe it rang true personally, innerly for the Steppenwolf, for Henry Haller. But I would argue that basically everyone has those same things. So while he was seeing himself as a plurality, everyone else was a singular person. And, oh, that's Hermann. Oh, that's Pablo. Oh, that's the old professor I used to know. So that was one of the things where I was like, you know what? He's obviously thinking in this way, but I'm not sure that's like the correct way of thinking. And that could add to his thoughts of loneliness and isolation and depression. The quality of depression and suicide, I think he captures a bit of that. It's sort of hard to talk on these topics because like I personally experienced a quite heavy depression when I was younger. And while I can talk about it in some sense, in another sense, I can't. It's very difficult to explain like the malaise of why you don't take the steps to improve yourself that you could. And I think that for me was what characterized like my depressive episode, which was I knew what I needed to fix to become a better person, to achieve the things that I wanted to, but I couldn't get that initial momentum starting. And although that's not exactly what he describes in this book, he does talk about the topic in a way that I could understand as well. So he's one of the things as well is that a lot of the things of the actual narrator I absolutely detested. So he was rather cowardly in some senses, in the sense that he really wanted to commit suicide but was too afraid to go through it, but couldn't live in his own mental state and how he was. He was very judgmental of other people and would criticize them and whatnot, not realizing like that he was the same as well. He had this very strange arrogance of being isolated, but at the same time he was not that different from everyone else around him. This sort of exceptionalism that he thought he had, which for me, I'm not a big fan of, but that's my thoughts on the character. And I suppose one of the things with books like this is I suppose I have a habit of projecting of myself into the story and saying like, would I actually like this character? How would I behave in that circumstance? And that's probably not the best way to be reading these sorts of books. It's more like you should be taking a step back and trying to see empathize with the character, but at the same time, not get too drawn into their personal failings and whatnot, as a reflection of yourself, I guess. It's a hard one to say. The importance of direction and guidance from a strong will. So as I mentioned, he meets this girl, Hermione, who basically says to him, you're going to obey whatever I say now, and this will give you an ability to step back from your own mind, because it's not like you're making the judgments anymore. I'm making it. You're going to do this. I'm telling you to do this. And he finds that very liberating and freeing, which in a sense is strange because she's imposing all these strict rules and things on him that he actually doesn't want to do. I think there's something of this, like a little bit of this maybe describes the German character as well. I've been reading 2 books recently on Storm of Steel and All Quiet on the Western Front, which are books of World War I German officers in World War I. And there seems to be a particularly German trait of falling into line and finding freedom in a subservience to a higher power. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but it's just an interesting little observation I've noted from a couple of different sources recently. The Magic Theatre. So yeah, the theme of that, I have no idea. Read it for yourself and tell me what you think, because for me, it seemed like an exploration into his own mind of the different stories that he could be and could have constructed, but then it's just straight out strange and flat in some places. So I'm like, God, I have no idea what this is about. Some observations for me from the book. For Madmen Only should be the subtitle. It's mentioned so many times that I feel like it should have maybe had a stronger part in the actual titling and potentially even like the starting of the book. What it represents as well is hard to strain down and identify. I suppose it's him noting his difference from everyone else. And so when he sees a little snippet or a sign that says For Madmen Only, or these different little places where he'll observe it, I think that's like his own inner calling of saying, look, I'm going to follow this path because it's for madmen only. It's like, I guess when you have a sense of you should be doing something, and you hear people of stories of like how they decided not to get on a plane, which was then to crash because they had a bad feeling about it, or things like that. I think that's, sort of that one's a bit supernatural and strange. And, I would probably argue, how many times have they done that and nothing bad has happened or whatnot? But I think it's that same thought of following your own path in life and sticking to it, and you will eventually come out with some sort of reward or deeper understanding. He captures poignantly the essence of nostalgia and mood changes. The Steppenwolf experiences multiple changes from almost elation to joy to depression to a sadness to a longingness to lust to whatever, and it goes very rapidly. So I think the author did, Hermann Hesse did a very good job of capturing these different changes and weaving it into a flowing story. The author himself said he believed the book was very misinterpreted. As this book was published in 1917, and it deals with some themes which I guess back then were very taboo, such as the Steppenwolf had multiple sex partners, or like his partner had multiple sex partners. There was not a rampant abuse, but there was a lot of references to drugs and definitely smoking, but I think as well cocaine potentially. Actually, I'm not even sure if that was around back then. Opium probably. And I suppose this was one of the reasons the book was absolutely maliciously attacked when it first came out. But now with 21st century morals, we're like, oh, that stuff's pretty tame. And so we can look at the book a little bit more afar away and the essence of the book. The second part was that it was attacked for being very pessimistic of the human condition, very pessimistic of the future, and I suppose what we could expect from the world. I always found that strange because it's like, it's just a guy writing. He doesn't necessarily, endorse every single thought the character has, or endorse, oh, this is what a person should be like. It's just maybe, him going through his own experiences, and granted they're different from other people's and different from the world, but this is his way of interacting with it. So I do feel like he did probably get attacked a little bit unfairly for the book. And he himself notes that the book ends on like an uplifting note, where he goes through this magical theater experience and I guess has some sort of revelation, and then what he uses from that, I'm not too sure, because that's where the book ends. But yeah, just interesting. One of the other interesting things I found was there's actually a song on the Steppenwolf by BTS, a very popular Asian band. I had absolutely no idea, and that's just a little interesting thing if you're into BTS. Personally, I already mentioned personally I didn't like the character, but I suppose why didn't I like the character? And I'm going to get into this a little bit more in Demian in the next book review. But it seemed that, I think I didn't like the character because the parts of me that I disliked in myself were very apparent in him. And I just didn't want to hear or read or see about that. That stuff is, very hypocritical in a sense, because I'm judging someone else for their own flaws and faults that I have. But I guess that's just one of the things that, it's interesting to observe in yourself. When you really dislike someone, why do you dislike them? And it's usually because you can see parts of yourself in them. But more of that to come on the book review for Demian. In summary, it's a rather gloomy and sad book with parts of ecstatic exuberance. So if you're using it as a interesting little book, you know, some maybe Sunday reading on a nice beach or something like that, I probably wouldn't recommend it for that. I think there's more one that if you're in like a little bit of a mood and you want to, I suppose, dive a little bit deeper into the worst parts of the human psyche, that's where you should be reading this book. For me, it was gloomy and sad, so yeah, I can't just like say this is for everyone. Particularly if you're in a depressive place or whatnot, this might not be the book for you. But for me, I enjoyed it, but I couldn't empathize with the character strongly. I felt he was displaying all these traits that I quite dislike, and while interesting, it's probably his personality was a little bit too far estranged from me to really be like, oh, I connect with this person. So that's just my little observations on the book. So I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. The Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse. What's a pragmatic thing I'm going to do from this? Read more Hermann Hesse, because I do actually like his works. As I mentioned, I'm going to review Demian after this. I've already read Siddhartha, which I highly recommend as well. And I'm going to read some more of this author, because I do feel he's able to capture something within the human spirit, particularly in his fiction works, which I just find very intriguing and has a lot of wisdom in it. So that is it for today. Please leave some comments if you're interested in knowing more of the book, or if there's any books you'd like me to review or whatnot. Would definitely be keen for that. But apart from that, I'm going to leave it there. So, Karen out.